So I'm going to talk about Ionic 2. It's pretty clear and relevant, I think, to all your interests.
I have a question already.
Yeah?
Did you mean intro to Ionic 2, or did you mean into Ionic 2, like let's get into Ionic 2?
I think this was the intro,
Okay.
but let's pretend it was into
Kind of
and
both
just
at the
hide
same
that out.
time.
Yeah, into Ionic 2. Same thing. So I mentioned in my little subtitle over here that you might learn a little Angular 2 here, and that's kind of impossible to avoid because Ionic 2 is so heavily based off of Angular 2. But that's fine. It's not too much more work, and it's really nice. It's cool. It's component based. I'm going to be using ES6 syntax, classes, decorators. That's actually ES7, but whatever. Typescript is going to be part of my code, so you might be confused by some stuff. If so, ask questions. I can help you out. My goal right now is mostly just to give you a quick walkthrough as to what's happening with Ionic, a little bit what's happening with like next generation JavaScript frameworks and how they're kind of changing, and hopefully get feedback and get some questions answered. Let's talk about me a bit. Who am I? It's a very big question, but let's keep it small. So I am a software dev. I've been working at Rangle for, it'll be 3 years in August, so 2.5 years, I could just say that. It's been great, it's been really awesome. I started very junior. I started knowing very little, and now I know just a little bit more, so working on it. Been working at Rangle, like I said, for 2.5 years, and just call me Della. Della is my shorthand. It works. I've been called that for like 20 years, so I'm used to it. And a big warning, I tend to do this often. If I talk too fast, you guys should let me know. Tell me to slow down, and I can. And that's a picture of me doing stuff. Should we turn off the lights?
I don't know if it's okay for the video.
No.
Matthew, is it okay? If we turn off the lights?
You can turn off the lights. It's fine.
Okay, I'm gonna do it myself because I'm handy. Cool.
Is that too dark? Is that too dark?
Yes, but people here are more important.
We'll figure it out. She'll do her stuff.
I'm afraid of the dark, to be honest, so that would be a bit freaky for me. Is this okay?
Perfect. All right, so what is Ionic? And by extension, what is Ionic 2? I'm assuming some people here probably know about Ionic and have played with it and used it. Who here has? Okay, so like most of you. You won't be too confused by Ionic 2, but there's a lot of new stuff. Ionic is all about the hybrid mobile web. You often want to use these technologies you know already. You want to use Angular. You want to use underscore. You want to use. There's a whole bunch of like JavaScript libraries that you want to use on the web, but you also want to have a native application. And learning how to use Java and all the things come with it for like an Android application and Swift or what's it called? Basic C or something or other. What? That's the one. For iOS is too much work. So how do we take advantage of these technologies? And that's where the hybrid mobile web comes in. Ionic allows you to create a native application with web technologies. It isn't like React Native. React Native is actually converting your web technologies into a native application. It's more like it takes advantage of some native APIs, but mostly it gives you a web view so that you have CSS, you have HTML, and you can kind of just apply it with your JavaScript in the background to give you an application that works, but also has access to compass, camera, etc. Ionic specifically wraps around Angular 2. Angular for Ionic 1 and Angular 2 for Ionic 2. This gives you additional value. If you're already very proficient with Angular 2, jumping into Ionic is great. It's very little work, very little headway. Just go at it, and you'll figure out quite a bit. One thing you'll notice is that Ionic lately talks about how they don't need Cordova to be part of their suite of tools. That's because Ionic is mostly a visual layer. If you want to make a mobile application, I'd recommend using Cordova. But if you want to just have Ionic be your style library for your web app, you can do it. It's a little bit tricky, but you can do it. And that's kind of what Ionic does. It comes built in with a lot of styled components. And this is, I think, the most value that you can get out of Ionic, especially Ionic 2. You get a lot of really good-looking, cool components that will take you forever to replicate. And these are kind of oriented around mobile functionality and mobile gestures. So you can kind of get all that for free while still focusing mostly on the more complicated stuff like business logic. Ionic is different than like a phone gap application with just pure JavaScript over top of it, because Ionic, well, one thing it does is it relies on the modern web. So if you are using Android 3 point something or other and you're using iOS 6, it's not going to work. They're expecting you to have later OSs and stuff, and it's good in that we all hate working for like IE6 and IE7 because the APIs are crap. So you don't have to worry about that as much with Ionic. You might lose some market share, but not too much. Also, Ionic recently kind of put more effort into being functional and workable with Windows Phone. So if you need a Windows Phone framework, or if you want to actually make an application that works on iOS, Android, and Windows Phone, one code base. So I'll talk a bit about specifically Ionic 2 and Angular 2. So like I mentioned before, Ionic 2 wraps around Angular 2. You have a lot of functionality with that. You have a lot of new stuff. One big thing is Angular 2 is really, really focusing on the component-based architecture. In fact, not just Angular 2. If you look at any new JavaScript framework, they're all based on component-based architectures. You look at Aurelia, you look at React, you look at Angular 2. I'm sure there's more I'm missing, but they all kind of exhibit this almost, you might call it OOP architecture, but it works with JavaScript and it works well. So if you feel like you want something that's simple to start with in terms of this whole component-based architecture revelation happening on the web, Angular 2 is pretty good. Ionic 2 is great. So feel free to use this also as a tool to kind of learn Angular 2. Angular 2 also for free is faster than Angular 1. That's great. There are a lot of things you can do with Angular 2 to make it even faster as well. There's a term change detection. I think we've all heard it if we work with Angular 1. So Angular 1's core change detection is a lot better. But on top of that, they also give the opportunity to do more, let's call it precise change detection. Like for example, you can, well, I won't go into examples actually, it's too complicated. But if you get a chance, I give you, I would recommend you go to like Victor Sapkin's blog and read about his comments on Angular 2's change detection, because they're very, very informative. But for now, let's not worry about it. Let's keep it simple, let's keep it straightforward. So one nice thing about Ionic 2 is that it really implements, alongside iOS design principles, material design principles. So if you want to have some applications look really good on iOS and look like other iOS applications, but also look really good on Android and look like the best Android applications that use material design, you can absolutely do that. Or if you want to, you can say, I want both to look like material design, or both to look like iOS, or some special combination of the two. And I'll show you a bit how to do that later on. The point being that Ionic has a lot of mobile styles built in that give you flexibility and gives you, I guess, peace of mind, and we want to actually get your applications running without having to worry about making them look good at the same time. One valuable thing is that Ionic 2 has a really cool new, let's call it module that handles native functionality. They call it Ionic Native, not to be confused with like React Native that actually completely and utterly emulates the native experience. Ionic Native is just basically what they're calling their next generation of NG Cordova, if we know what that is. Angular Ionic wrapper around Cordova APIs with promises and observables emitted. So both Ionic 2 and Angular 2 are still in beta. So you have to be careful of bugs. Bugs are going to be everywhere. In fact, I hit like 4 bugs yesterday and today when I was getting ready for the presentation. I just powered through. You can't do anything about it. They already are aware of, I think, all of them, and they're working on them. So hopefully in time, well, not hopefully, definitely in time, they'll be stable and they'll be able to do this with fewer bugs. But for now, let's just deal with it and barge on. So how do we start? Real quick overview, because this is the boring stuff. You can look it up on their internet, on their website. They have all this information, really. I'll just go over it super quick. So Ionic has a beta CLI that helps you work with all the Ionic 2 commands, which are mostly the same, but you want to use a flag. -v2 you see over there. To start a project up, you just say Ionic start, put in a name. If you want to, you can use an optional starter template and say -v2 if you want to be Ionic 2, and -ts if you want to be TypeScript. Ionic 2 is actually comfortable with being completely in regular JavaScript. So if you are really adamantly against TypeScript, you're comfortable, you're fine. So I made a little fun demo application. You'll see it soon enough. I called it Pick and Choose to play off the word Pikachu because I made a Pokemon dating Tinder app. It's pretty cool. You'll see it soon. But it's really quick, really easy, and it's good for showing you some really interesting, cool stuff without having it be a to-do list. But you see Ionic start, Pick and Choose, dash has v2 because it's an Ionic 2 application, dash has ts because I want to be TypeScript. So if you're curious about TypeScript or if you're lost with TypeScript, raise your hand, I'll help you out best I can. So then you go into the directory and then you serve it. Dash lab, something that not a lot of people know about. It's something that's in Ionic 1 as well. It lets you have a side-by-side view of both Ionic on iOS and Android. It's really cool. That's basically it. So some quick TypeScript stuff. Just I figured people might not have a lot of experience with this. So I'll go over some quick notes to hopefully make it a little bit easier, a little bit easier to swallow in general. So you'll see a lot of ES6 and ES7 APIs. You'll see class syntax is all over the place. It's mostly just sugar. It's an object with prototypes. It's what you expect it to be. If you're used to Java and how they write classes or C#, you'll feel pretty comfortable. So anonymous functions, I'll have a lot of them in my application, and this is basically the format right there. You know, this motion and an arrow. If you get confused and lost, if you see a lot of them, let me know. I'll kind of break it down for you. And I don't use a lot of constant lets. I don't use a lot of variables in general, but if I do, you'll see them here and there. They're great. Spend some time looking them up. They're really useful. They make property setting and variable setting a lot less, let's say, anxiety-inducing. And one thing I really recommend is something I warmed to recently, and I'm continuing to warm to, is typing. So I was very much against typing because JavaScript is very well untyped. But I played with TypeScript a lot, and I've gotten really used to using TypeScript to kind of almost document my applications. So when I look at my code after a week or 2 weeks, or somebody else looks at it, they know, oh, this is an array of objects with properties X, Y, and Z, and makes it much easier for them to reason about it. So let's dive right in, actually. So first and foremost, when I'm using Ionic 2, I'm using it with TypeScript, and TypeScript uses ES7 syntax, which has something called decorators. Decorators are really, really cool. They're basically just functions you can throw on top of a class and have additional stuff happen to it. It's a nice way to decorate a class, well, yeah, obviously, to give it cool functionality. So I'm going to show you right now. Let me know if this is too small. Probably is too small. Let's make it a little bit bigger. Good? Cool. So this is mostly generated from my Ionic start application CLI command, but it's very straightforward. What you're seeing here, first of all, at the very top are import statements. Import statements are, again, an ES6 thing. TypeScript kind of takes advantage of it and makes it look a little prettier, but that's mostly what it's supposed to look like. You do have a few things happening here. You have things called app and platform being imported from Ionic Angular. So Ionic Angular is basically the Ionic library, or one part of it. And these are this is a decorator, and this is, I'm pretty sure this is an object. Yes, that's available internally. And you can do some pretty cool stuff with that. So that's what all this is. You see some stuff from Ionic Native, and this is actually from my own little part of the application, my pages section. I'll go more into that later on, but for now, let's look at this. So this is a decorator right here. So this decorator is a way to tell the application that this is the core root part of the application. Normally with Angular 2, you'd have a bit more to do with bootstrapping an application. The app decorator kind of takes care of it all for you. It basically implements the bootstrap command that you would see normally in an Angular application and hides it behind a very clear, understandable part of the application. So you can see right here, the template is very similar. If you've written directives in Angular 1, you'll notice it's almost the same. A few things differently. You have the Ion nav component. That component has to do with navigation. When you pass in pages, and you pass in a property called root page into the root of the Ion nav, you tell it this is actually my home page. It's, again, I don't want to get too much into it right now because it's actually very robust. It's very much better than Angular 1's routing. And this is even, again, additionally a step past that. because it's Ionic's version of this, but it's really something I spent time, like a long time looking at. So if you have a chance and you want to see more about how Ionic 2 routes, the section on their API, the docs are very thorough. I'll go into config a little later. Config is really cool. Config is a way to kind of externally configure your application. In fact, you can do some really cool stuff with configuring the URL. I'll show you that too. But let's get down to brass tacks over here. This is the main application components. So I'm exporting a class called myApp. All very scary, but I don't think I even need to export this, but it's force of habit. My application is a class. It's an object. It represents the components, and this is where my application is bootstrapped altogether. So you can see right here, root page is a property on this class. It's equal to tabs page, which I import from one of my tabs when I start one of my folders, and that is passed into here. This is all how routing happens. Like I'm saying that my main page is this tabs page, which I am calling root page in this class, and this template has access to all my class properties. So root page is passed over there, and then ta-da, you have your application, you have your base route. It worked great. It's not that scary and hard. It may look a little bit like it is. It really isn't. And you have a constructor over here. Constructors are basically where you start up your components. So constructors are very interesting in that you don't always want to work in a constructor. Often the constructor fires before you have Angular bindings all set up. So there's another thing called ng-on-init that you want to play with. But for now, again, don't worry about it. Just little notes to keep in the back of your mind. So you have your platform ready, promise-based, very straightforward, all very much, I think, understandable. Hopefully, I don't have to explain that to you, but if you do have questions, please ask. This just basically means your application is set up. That's it, nothing else. A lot of that boilerplate you see in Angular 2 applications, if you guys have played with it, is gone. It's taken care of in that app decorator. I'd really encourage, if you get a chance, go to Ionic's GitHub page and look into that code. It's very, very good at showing you what you can do with decorators. It's really, really solid. So this app decorator is a core part of your application, and configuring it is a very cool thing you can do as well. And I'll show you real quick. I'll go to the website, actually. Here we are. You can see some of the cool stuff you can do. You can configure a lot of the visual stuff here. So action sheets, the animation for entering and exiting, same with regular transitions, buttons, all that stuff. You can set up on a very top level your entire application in different contexts. One really cool thing you can do is, you can see over here, I made this, it's not necessary, but I put a little property up there. You can see it says, I don't know if you can see, but it says Ionic mode, MD. Mode is the overall style, so there's two modes that are big. There's iOS and MD. MD is material design. iOS is, well, obviously iOS. So right now it's material designed, but if I were to do this, and hopefully network works up, there you are. You can see now this is completely different. It's iOS styled. So you can actually configure almost all your properties in the URL as well, which is very, very, very powerful, very, very cool. Oh yeah, it's okay, cool. I'll show you more later about that little app. But that's basically it. That's configuring your application. You can do a lot more cool stuff there. The URL is right there if you want to take a look at all the options you have. But this is something I think a lot of people have wanted for Ionic, or at least an easier way to configure top-level rules. Normally you have to go into like your platform folder and modify a bunch of stuff. Not really necessary here. So, which way are my slides? There we are. So that was app. Now I want to show you page. So you'll see, again, this is another @ sign thing. If you go here, we'll see that @ page. So pages are basically another decorator you can add on an Ionic application. So both app and page actually extend Angular 2's @component decorator. So what this means is that all that stuff you can do in a regular @component decorator, you can do in the @page decorator or @app decorator. But on top of this, you also have access to, for free, without having to actually import them. I don't know if you guys have worked with Angular 2, but to include directives, you have to say a whole thing with directives and pass in the directives from your import. It can be a little bit tedious, especially if there's a lot of it, a lot of boilerplate. Taken care of. All Angular 2 core directives and all Ionic directives are for free implemented inside of any @page or app components. So that's probably one of the more valuable things you can do with that. But on top of that, @pages on any component, or any class rather, is a kind of a way to decorate that class with the information required to properly navigate through the application. So Ionic is really great at for free, giving you animation, giving you navigation that looks very mobile friendly. And all you have to do right now with your components to make that work with Ionic 2 is make sure it's on add page. That's important for modals, it's important for top level applications, but as long as it's an add page and you transition to it, it's going to be stored in your history. So you have a really clear, very simple state-based history, component-oriented, and all you have to do to include anything in that history is to add page it. So this is very powerful. I won't go into the full details as to what you can do with this because I could talk forever, but it's really cool and something people want for a long time. We probably have all worked with Ionic 1's kind of wonky history here and there, have to deal with like going back and forward, have to deal with like branching histories. It's a pain in the butt, and this makes it a lot better. So over here you can see that this is actually the page I came to from my home page. So this is actually my root page. I have a template URL, and I have a provider. So it's tough to really talk about how much Angular 2 I want to bring into this conversation, but I'll just say that providers are a way for you to dependently inject, for you to handle dependency injection with services in your components. So this My Pokemon service, something we'll see in a few minutes, is a little object I have that handles all of the API calls that I need for my application. Actually, no, this is the one that handles my global state. So with providers and with injecting providers into your application, this hierarchy that you would see in your application because of a component-based hierarchy, where you have your app and then you have the pages below it and you have the components below it, also works with providers. So if you want a provider available to all your application, put it on the top level, and it's available to all your application. You don't have to then re-implement it in all your pages. But why this is also very valuable and very important to remember, this is something that people don't often know about, is that when you do that, you create one instance of it, and you share that instance. When you inject a new provider and you make a new instance inside of each class in the constructors, what you end up doing is you end up creating different versions of it. So you can't share data among it. So if you want to share data across a single service and have it be like a singleton, then, well, they're all singletons technically, but if you want to have one object to share everything with, make sure you inject it on the top level of your application, and everything below it will share it. This is really important, really hard to kind of explain why it's important, because it gives you this completely different architecture for your application. When you look at your applications now, there might be a mess of like components and pages and directives and what have you, controllers all over the place, connecting to that one, services going over here and over there, and it's an entire cat's cradle mess. But with this structure, you're really kind of forcing a unidirectional approach to how you look at your application. You're going top down, you're going app to every other component, and you can very easily dictate how you want your application to play out. And each of these branches can be very powerful, and if you do it right, can be completely isolated. You have a branch that you can pluck out your application, put it anywhere else, and it'll work the way you want it to. Again, I won't go into that exact detail, but if you do really want to know more about this, I'd recommend looking into the unidirectional data approach of libraries like Redux. Redux is really great for this, but I digress. This is actually a great example of an app page. It's very simple, very clean. And you can see over here something called tab 1 root, tab 2 roots. I'll go right inside of the tab HTML file. So this is that cool file I had a second ago. Cool things to note, you have the Ion navbar up here. So it's really, really cool and easy to update your navbar across any part of your application. You just have to put in a directive, or rather the components, into any page, any template you want, and you can specify exactly how you want it to look like. So on this page, and every page below it, the Ion navbar looks like this. Very simple, very straightforward, and that's what we have. If you look at it over here, little notifications icon in the corner, pick and choose, that's all it is. And makes it very easy for you to have different navbars and different pages of the application, which is something I think people want often. Over here, you have a tabs component. So I think we all know what tabs are. So we can have multiple tabs very easily plunked into our application, and we can pass data down very easily. Have titles, have icons, have, well, there's a few more things you can add in there, but the great thing about it is that you actually have these very isolated from each other. A tab instance doesn't even fire the first time until you open it up. So if you have 2 tabs, 3, 4 tabs, they're not all running in the background. As soon as you open it up, it then instantiates. So it gives you, again, these are little things you can do to improve your performance and keep your application running smoothly. Because on mobile, that's always a problem, having too many things, too many watchers. I think we all remember working with Angular 1 and Ionic 1 and having 1,000 million watchers slow down applications. This is one little thing you can see that will kind of give you an overall idea of how much performance is a big focus to Ionic and Angular 2 for that matter. So that's the template. That's a TS file. And now let's jump into config. So actually I did config, so I'll skip by config. I talked about that enough. It's good enough. We'll go right to theming. So theming is done pretty interestingly in Ionic 2. Very similar to Ionic 1 actually, but it's not too complicated. If you go into, this is really small. I don't know how to expand this part. Can I do this? Nope, I can't. Okay, so just trust me if you can't see it. Pardon? Control and zoom. Nope. Oh well, next time. So you'll see right inside of the application, we have a theme folder. I'm fine. I'm good. It's too much work. So theme over here contains all your app styles. You can see it has styles for, you can't see. So over here is styles for material design. Here are styles for iOS, and here are core styles. So this is basically a way to very easily organize your application and import different, it's very Sass oriented by the way. They use Sass for the styling. But you can import Sass files from your application into this, and it kind of compiles into this one overall style sheet that is applied to your final build. If you want to go and modify variables, core variables over here, all here. You can change the primary color, secondary color, danger color, light color, all that stuff. And this is done very well across iOS and Android, or rather iOS and material design. If you get a chance to play around with this, I'd recommend it because it's really a great way to give your application a completely new look with very little work. All you have to do is change a few colors, and your app will look completely different. Additional to this, you can create variables and shared properties across your application for design. So one complicated thing is that if you want to include Sass files from your application, you have to import them into a shared import section. You can label it for you right there. It's just because the way it builds, it makes it too complicated to try to have CSS files that are included into your components. So a shared section is how they solve that problem. So that's basically it. You can see my Tinder slider thing over here. Simple SCSS file. It's mostly just CSS actually, nothing too complicated. But theming is also very powerful in general in the application. You can do a lot of cool stuff. You can create entire style sheets that make all your apps look the same. They do a really good job at providing you with all the tools you need to do so. And like I mentioned before, with config, you can configure this on the fly with URLs or with that overarching config object. So now I'm going to talk about something that's more Angular 2 oriented, but I want to go over services before I start looking at the application. There's a very useful, important thing we do with all of our applications, and that's make HTTP requests. It's a bit different in Angular 2 than it was from Angular 1, and so I figured I'd spend some time showing you how it is different. First, I'll go over the ingestible services first. Let's take a look at this. Is that too big? Probably. So you'll see there's a few things here that are a little bit different. We do have another decorator, injectable. That injectable decorator tells Angular, this is not an Ionic thing, this is an Angular thing, that this class is supposed to be a service that is that is provided to other classes. It's a really simple way to kind of tell Angular what the role of this class is. Well, that's what all the decorators do. The role of this class is to, in this case, handle your HTTP requests. So it's a very simple class. Very important thing here is that we do an instantiation of HTTP. With TypeScript, you can do it very easily. Normally, you do something like this. Take out this private. You may see this a lot. This dot HTTP equals something like that. That's very redundant. You can just do one of these, and it'll take care of it for you. Just add private in the beginning, and it knows that this is a property it should be applying to this object as a private property. So I have another parameter over here called query params. It's a really small param. I just have a limit 1000 on my request. I'm hitting the Pokemon API, and if you do just a generic Pokemon request, you get all the Pokemon. But if you don't specify limit, you get just 20, and that's boring. So I wanted all of them. So I do an HTTP get, this.http get, pass in the URL, and I pass in my object as a second parameter that handles like things like searches. So this is search is the way of saying queries, and that's it. That's basically it. Then I give back my response, and then I map to the result. So this is going to be the most confusing part for most people, the dot maps and stuff. So the first thing to note is that in Angular 2 and by proxy in Ionic 2, there's a much larger focus on something called observables. So observables are, well, the one library they use is called RxJS, but this is the concept in which you have data being event-driven and emitted, and it's a very powerful thing. It's kind of their solution to asynchronous code, like promises were. But rather than promises, you have something a little more, I'd say more powerful, maybe a little more complicated, but that's kind of hand in hand. What we're doing here is we're saying, I'm going to get this data from the Pokemon API. I want to get 1,000 Pokemon, and I want to get that data back. And when I do, I want to map it. And again, this is one of those anonymous functions I told you about. I want to map the response. So, and this is a way of saying, with this response, return this new response, response.json. So luckily, the response objects that you get back from your database are wrapped in Angular stuff. And that Angular object that it's wrapped in has a .json property that lets you convert it to JSON. Otherwise, you'll get just a pure string, which is impossible to work with. So I'm saying, give me the response, which is a pure string, essentially. Now convert it to JSON, and let me play with it. On top of that, that object has headers and other information. I just want the results. So then I want to map it again, so the results are returned. This is a very functional approach to programming, and while it's not necessary, absolutely not necessary at all to how you handle your applications, I'd highly recommend it. I think more than anything else, the growing functionality, or rather the functional approach, the FRP approach that you see in the web is the most useful thing, more than any new libraries, any new fancy, cool ES6 cool things. Learn how to be a functional programmer, and you'll have a lot more going for you. So we have this method here called getAllPokemon, and I can call it inside of my pick.ts file, like so. So I'm importing the Pokemon API service from my services folder. And then inside here, my constructor for this component, I'm saying, make me a new instance of it, call it Poke API. So that's all very TypeScript. And then when the application inits, or when this component inits, I want to get that API. I want to that API file, rather, or object. I want to get all Pokemon. Then I want to map that full list of Pokemon into one that removes a name that has a dash in it. That seems kind of weird, but the pictures I use, the API I use for pictures, does not support any Pokemon that have dashes in their names, so I just took them all out. And then I want to take that list, and I want to shuffle them up. So I made a little shuffle function over here that just mixes them up and randomizes it. And then I want to map that new list and filter out just the first 50. So again, very, very functional, very, very probably new to a lot of you, but once you get used to it, very painless, and this is a great way to work with your applications. So now my this.pokemon $, and this $, you see, I'll use to denote observables. I just pass right into this property. So this is a template, and this is my Pokemon Tinder component. This is the actual swiping component. As a property, I'm going to call it Pokemon list. I want to pass in that observable. But observables are, again, not exactly something that you're used to. So you might not know about the async pipe. So first I'll go over pipes. They're basically filters from Angular 1, but they just smartened up and started calling them pipes because pipes are a little bit more agnostic. So whenever you want to create a pipe to, let's say, change the currency values or to, well, that comes for free, but to change your formatting of your view, you can do so very easily with Angular 2. And they have some that come in for free, like Async. Async is one that works for promises and for observables. What it does is it takes a promise or observable, it unwraps it essentially, and then it pipes it down to wherever we want to show it. So if once we're on the view, I'd use async on a double curly bracket. If I want to pass it into a property, I use async, and it works great. And you can chain pipes as well too. So if you want to async it and then you want to map it or do something cool with it and pluck out certain properties, you can absolutely do it with new pipes. But for now, we're just going to keep that Pokemon property, which is an observable. We're going to pipe it into Pokemon list, and we're going to unwrap it. So let me go back to my application real quick and show you what that little piece is. So you can see this is my app. And this thing over here, oh, I can't swipe on this, is the Tinder part. So I tap, Pokemon goes by, and whenever I click on it, it gets saved into my team. You see, I almost clicked on it right there. Very, very simple. These are the tabs, 2 tabs. There's the Catch 'em tab and the My Team tab. And this is the button that I use to move things along. So I think that's actually all you need to know about injectable. I know it's kind of a tangent, but injectable is just how you tell Angular that you want to make an injectable service that you want to pass into your application. You can see, again, if I go back to pick.ts, I have to do one thing over here. I have to add as a provider. So I did that again with my other service, the Pokemon API service. I put it as a provider on the top level. That's because I want it to be shared across more things. With this page, I just need it to be available for this one component. So I'll plug it in right there. And now every child component as well will have that Pokemon API instance available to it. So again, one of those things that you will probably not understand right away, but it'd be very valuable to catch up with and understand properly, because it will make you have a much more efficient application. So after that, did the HTTP already. That's it. So that's my application as a whole. You can see how it works. You can see how it runs. If you want to go to GitHub and go to this address, this is a blog over a little while ago that kind of talks about what I did over here. And this is the API I used, and these are docs I had. One more thing I want to show you, actually, before I forget, is the slides. So this is the component I use for sliding, and this is something that was a big deal for me a little while ago for a project I had. I needed to make a gallery, a gallery swiper slider sort of piece to a project I was on, but I couldn't find any good libraries to do so. Eventually, I landed on Swiper.js. And recently, Ionic implemented Swiper.js for their Ionic 1 and Ionic 2 applications, rather frameworks. So now all slides, that slide I used over here, this slide is basically just a Swiper.js slide. You can configure it like a Swiper.js file with this object. You can specify, this is the effect I'm using, the cover flow effect. And you can essentially do whatever you want with with the regular API for that library and plug it into this application. So it's a very valuable thing, a very powerful thing. If you have a lot of need for sort of swiper or gallery, then this is perfect. That's all I want to talk about. Yeah, that's it, basically. So I am sharing this library online. Feel free, again, if you want to see a picture of that URL. It's right there. Pick and choose.